Before we dive into the video, a quick word from our sponsor, TradeStation. As tape readers, we rely heavily on TradeStation for their time and sales. TradeStation offers ATC students an account representative, zero commission, and a cash reward with qualifying deposits. Now back to the video.
Hey, Rich, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Doing well. What's going on?
Good. Not much. We're just going over stocks. So what do you want to what are you looking at?
So LCID, I feel like is probably the best opportunity. I think Davis called out in the chat INDO, and that did give 850 aspirants, and that did pull back pretty nicely to 8 off of them. And then I feel like that kind of made its move, and it was kind of choppy on the way up. So I don't know if you'd really get a trade out of it. And 850, I would assume, probably made their money at this point.
Okay,
So
so if you were looking to trade this stock, what would have to happen? Because you're going to see this a lot, and this is like just a personality where all of a sudden a stock, it's almost like a news catalyst where volume comes out of nowhere and it starts moving. Now, as the stock's just going straight up, if we try to buy it, we're chasing it. So we can't do that. So what would actually have to happen here in order for you to be able to take a high percentage entry?
a pullback.
Definitely a pullback. So let's get more specific. What prints would we need to see? What would need to happen? How could we be able to trade this?
So we'd probably have to get new ask prints, and then to suggest that it should pull back again. And then we would want to see building on that pullback. And then we'd want to see, the off-level ask kind of come in on that pullback. And you wouldn't really want to see short positions start to step up on it.
Okay, perfect. What number right now, just based off where the stock is, if we want to trade this, where would we have to see ask prints?
I would say at 9.
Perfect. So in this situation, really, there's not much we can do. It would have to come up to 9, and I didn't see, it doesn't look like it printed at 9, but we'd have to see ask prints at 9, based off the amount of ask prints and based off of the other prints and the reaction, stuff like that. We'd be able to determine what our pullback would be, and then we'd be looking for a number 4 trigger up.
Right. And then with those 850 bids, would you be able to take, I'm assuming you could easily take a number 2 off of those, right? On the pull up and then a short trigger down.
So number 2 trade would be to the downside.
Right. So would you not use those 850 bids?
Okay, so these 850 bids that just came in, could we take a pull up and then a trigger back to the downside to trade these?
Right.
So, I mean, in theory, but unfortunately, it's not shortable.
Okay, got it.
Now, I didn't look for shares, so I'm not sure if there's not shares, but see, the thing is that we can only do what they allow us to do. In theory, so it's interesting because in theory, I want you to think about something for a second. When we come over here and we look at these 850, what's our print personality overall?
It's printing pretty light. If you get 5 prints, it's kind of a big deal. So I would say it's probably 2 to 3.
Okay. So the only reason I would change that is if you look, when it kind of gets to certain spots, it doesn't really have, but I mean, most of them are above, but it does have a lot of prints in that, that 5, 6, 7, 8 type area. So I would put it a little bit higher. And the reason I say I would put a little bit higher, it's a cheap stock. So the orders aren't that thin. If they really want to print, they shouldn't have much of a problem with it. So my problem here with taking especially, I mean, it's a cheaper stock and we can't short it. So that's the obvious answer coming back in. But what if we look at here at 850, what could this easily be? Remember, exactly, because that's a perfect spot. I mean, it breaks, if you're up, let's say you're in it from whatever price, but it breaks 850, that's typically a pretty good spot to take off some of your position.
Okay, got it.
So because of that, because we're in such an uptrend, because it's a cheaper type stock, because of when you add all those personalities together, this just isn't enough prints for me to want to follow that person.
Right. So with a cheaper stock like this, I'm assuming you kind of need more buying than you would think, right? I mean, you would want to see probably like 10 prints at like that 9 level or something to really follow it to a high percentage, right?
Absolutely, because it's that cheap of a stock, there shouldn't be any problem. If someone's looking to get, a lot of shares, there shouldn't be any problem. I mean, it's trading 11 million total. I mean, this can really get going if it wanted to.
Right.
So
Okay.
I always use the rule of thumb that if I'm looking to make 50 cents on a cheaper stock, I need to see the prints for $1.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
That's just a rule of thumb I always use in my head, because if I can see the buying for $1, I should be pretty good with 50 cents. If I only see the buying for 50 cents, we know these stocks can move 42 cents and then all of a sudden bar down $3. So I
Right.
always kind of try to, to to put myself in a better position. And that's with any stock. The more prints that I have, the better off I'm going to be in the long run.
Right. Because that 50 cents, that could mean like 38 cents. And then all of a sudden, the risk reward isn't there, right?
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, making 30 cents on a 50-cent trade, I have no problem with. I will do that all day long, day in and day out. But to make that 50 cents, you'll notice it takes a lot more buying than we think. For the
Right.
most part, it depends on the personality, because there are cheaper stocks where the print personality is like 2 or 3. But in a stock like this, I mean, the volume's there, the orders are pretty decent, so they shouldn't have a large problem printing. So when I see a stock like this that's come down to that 850 level, even though how we've talked about before, yeah, there's controlling prints, but there's also prints at major levels that aren't controlling. I just don't see this person as somebody I can follow.
And that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I could see exactly why you're saying that based on where they were executed.
If it was a way more of an execution, or if they kind of hit it multiple times, then I can start, getting a little bit, further to there, getting my mind wrapped around to be okay with that. But
Mhm.
until that point, it's not something I want to put my money against, because I'm just,
Right.
it's like, it's iffy.
And then, so can we go back to LCID because I think we're starting to kind of get some buying coming into it.
Hmm. Let's take a
And I
look.
did have a question. So we did see those massive 30 bids right at like that 800 uh share bar. And
Hmm.
is that kind of like what you'd be looking for it to trigger back up that same like 800,000 range?
So the problem with that bar, if you look, it's unsustainable.
Right.
It's too high. So what I want to do is I want to come to my closest dip or my closest valley. So what I'm going to be looking for is over here. I'm going to be
Okay.
looking for something more in the 550,000 type range. Because if I try to follow this bar, it didn't work out the first time.
Mhm.
So why would I why would I want to follow it now?
Okay,
Because
that makes complete sense. I was just trying to figure out, what information we could really gather from that for the expected
yeah,
trigger.
and we would use right around here, right around this area, because you could see, so this bar is just kind of uncontrollable. It starts getting a little bit higher, it starts getting a little consistent. Then we go into our dip here. So our dip, I only need, 500 to 550,000, and that's plenty.
Okay, yeah, that's
Because
completely
remember,
fair.
everything's always going to be relative.
Hmm.
If we were talking about the beginning of the morning, I probably didn't even need that high of a bar,
Got it.
which is odd because that doesn't typically happen, that it's trading more volume now than it was in the beginning of the morning. But you see what I mean? So what I'm going to look for is just the most recent type of dip or valley. And then in this case, we just came in here. So I'm going to follow, like I said, right around that, 500 to 550,000. That should be fine. Now, of course, I want follow through to come in afterwards from that bar, but a bar that just comes out of nowhere, if it was 800,000 right now, more than likely it's going to fail. And eventually it's going to work, but it's not really going to do much.
Got it. And now with those prints that just came in, right around 29.90,
Hmm.
would you say that's new buying then?
Absolutely.
Because why would they cover there, right?
So the reason, I mean, exactly, because why in the world, if I'm going to cover, what number am I going to cover over at this point?
Over 30 if it breaks back
Yeah,
over.
why the hell would I cover under a support level?
Right, right.
You know what I'm
That
saying?
makes sense.
So in this
Yeah.
case, I mean, that's a phenomenal question, but these prints are actually really ballsy if you think
Mhm.
about it. Because I wouldn't take it as covering, because why the hell would you cover right under 30? Like, let it test 30. What's another, 10 cents at this point? If you already let it come up from its lows here of that 29.36, you already let it come up, what, 65 cents?
Right, right. No, that makes sense.
So, yeah, so when I see these prints, these are the type of prints that we're looking for this thing to be able to break and continue up for that pull up over that 30 level.
Now, I did get bids at 30, but it looked like it hit on the ask to me. I don't
I'm
know if I'm the
sorry, I
best at
wasn't looking at my time and sales was scroll down. I was still looking at these ones. I did not see it hit.
it's all good. I'm not the best with identifying how they hit on the matrix, but I'm pretty sure those looked like ask. I'm definitely getting better with it. But um
Yesterday's morning class on the recording has such a perfect example of it.
mhm,
I forget the exact number. It was later in the class, and as it was coming down, we saw it come up or on my screen, it came up as ask prints, but they were 100% bid prints.
got
So
it.
that might be something that you definitely want to take a look at, just so you can see what it looks like on the matrix and the time and sales at once. But I mean, based off the way that it looks, it does look like they probably were ask prints.
hmm And
If I don't see it, I'm not going to make something up and pretend that I did. I just didn't see it.
right, right. So are you going to take into account, obviously, with all that buying underneath, what does that kind of say for the pullback on if we were to assume those were 30 ask, right? What would that kind of say for the pullback? I mean, I don't know if we would expect a full 50 cents here, right? Before a trigger.
So absolutely not. And I'm going to tell you why. Because what prints did we just see that came in underneath it?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So these prints told us shorter term.
hmm
So if these were ask prints that are coming in, right again, right around personality, but I can't expect a large pullback from these
hmm
just because of the fact that, the prints that came in right underneath it told us shorter term. So I'm still going to be expecting some type of first of all, there's two things. I'm definitely going to be expecting some type of pullback from 30 because 30, we just had the largest market maker we've seen all day. The king of the crop is sitting there right now.
Right. It's definitely the
There's
dominant
someone at
market.
30 that's sitting behind a computer, probably in New York somewhere, could be on an island, who knows? But they're
Mhm.
sitting behind that computer watching that 30 level and they know what they're doing.
Mhm.
You don't sell that much at 30 without knowing what the hell you're doing.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So in this case, I don't need much. Like in that, just because and normally if I saw aspirants like that, I'd probably take off a decent, maybe even 40%, close to 50% off that, because we would need that larger pullback. And I could always look for another entry coming back in. But when we
Mhm.
have those prints there, and because it's not a huge amount in comparison to the way that we've seen it trading, its print personality at major levels has been way bigger. So in that case, I don't. It's not that they're not controlling Prince, but they're they're right on the brink of being controlling Prince. So I look at those as a lot shorter term.
Right. Because then I guess they could just be like prints at a level, just given how large the 30 bids were, right?
Yeah, I mean it could just be somebody taking the opportunity that they know the stock needs to pull up a whole bunch, and they know it's going to do it all at once based off what its personality says. So they might just be getting adding grabbing a position. Why not?
And because we already had, kind of like buying above and below here, do you really need to see like a ton of building still on, like, let's say this pulls back to 29.75, 29.80. I think that would be fair. But do you still need to see like that building come in, or did you kind of already get the prints that you needed to see?
I would still like to see more. I mean,
Okay.
I'm never, off level bursts are great, but the more people, the better. Think about it. The more people that need to make money, the better off we're going to be, because that's, multiple brains saying the same thing. So I
Mhm.
still would like to see more, because especially when this pulls underneath that 30 level, it told us that they're going to build a little bit. So I still want to see some type of building, because overall this trend is down. This stock is all selling. So we got to think, when we're taking a number 3 trade, this stock is still all selling. We're looking to help them build when they tell us it's time to build. So they, it's relative. The amount of prints that we saw at 30, the building doesn't have to be huge, but we need to see something. What would be the point of even printing at 30? Why not just print at 30.01 and just let it go?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So given that it's trading in like 50-cent increments, right? If we come back to those 29.90s, that like the first like bit of like new buying we saw, would
hmm
you say that those probably have to make like, up to like 34, or excuse me, 30, 40, 30, 50-ish
Well,
on those
I'm going
prints?
to base it off its increments. So what's the stock increments it's trading in?
50 cents.
Okay, so trading at 50 cents. So if that person at 90 was right at about print personality, how much do they need to make?
50 cents.
50 cents. So I'm going to be looking right in that, that 30, 40 area for something. And again, like we were talking about, before with the prints. So as we're coming to 30, 40, that doesn't mean that person's done. But if they're not done, there's going to be new buying that should be coming in at 30, 40 to weaken that 30, 50 level to be able to actually continue it to push.
That makes
Because
sense.
a level, until we have any information there, is concrete. We have to assume each level is going to be concrete. And the prints that come in are going to be either break it down or they're going to help build it back up. So even at this case, as we start pushing in, this stock still needs to go to about 30, 40. And if you notice, look at where the high was, where it went.
Yeah, it hit the nail on the head, right?
I mean, 30, 38. That's pretty damn close. So when we look at something like that, we want to see what prints do we have as it was coming towards that area. And unfortunately, nothing too great. I mean, you got a little bit at 20. I mean, this is 50,000 shares, so this is nice. Not going to help us with anything, but there's definitely somebody. But we want to see the ability for it to continue on, because again, riders and follow through only need to make a certain amount of money based off of what they show us. So if they only show us they need to make 50 cents, we could want them to make $3 all day long, but that's not what they showed us.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things in the beginning is like kind of just managing the trade based on what you say versus what you want to happen,
Oh, that's one of the hardest parts about trading. It's the emotional part. We want a ton. We look at, especially if you're looking at the chart, you want the chart. Right now, I would love to see this thing blast up to 34.50, but unfortunately, there's just nothing to show us that has to happen or is going to even come close to happening.
So if it started to, because it looks like we're building here a little bit. If it were to start to trigger right now, would you kind of like expect any games at like that print line at 30.78?
Anytime I see a print line, I know there's a market maker there.
So you
So what
want
I
to see
want to
this
do,
like respected on the way up?
so exactly. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to when it was around that print line. What happened? And if you look, it hugged this print line tightly.
Got it.
So there was somebody here that was doing something, because that's why it was sitting in that consolidation. It's not like the volume dissipated. If we had no volume and it just went sideways, that's one thing, but it was trading the same way that it was trading as, we're sitting in that consolidation. So I know somebody's there. So anytime I know somebody is sitting there, I have to be on guard that, that there's definitely going to be some type of games. That's why it's so important for us to get a better entry than the market maker. So when those games start to happen, we still have some room. In this case, the best case scenario would for this stock to be, come back up above 30, 50 really, but right in this area, come back, because everything's smooth sailing back towards the upside. So we could have a nice price target from this, 32, let's call it 32.25 up to this print line here at 33.41, because it's smooth. Once we see these consolidations, we know somebody's sitting there, just like 30 right now. See how it's playing games all around here?
Yeah, for sure.
Because we know the biggest market maker of the day is sitting right at that spot.
And I think you mentioned this in another class, and it's something I've been really trying to pay attention to. But do you see how like in the very beginning of the morning we kind of have all these like volume breakouts, like in that 34 down to like 32.50 level?
Yep.
So if they're still overall short on this, which 30 bids suggested, would you kind of say like they wouldn't want the price to really break above that consolidation at like 32.50 if that's kind of where their position is for the short?
So it depends, because where's their real position? So I know exactly what you're saying, but where's their real position if we actually look at this stock right now?
Oh, I guess it could be much higher, right?
Yeah, a ton higher, because when this happened, how much building could they do on this move towards the downside?
They could probably do quite a bit. Not when it's really moving like very quickly, but as you kind of get like that
So
those
a
overlapping bars.
parabolic move, you got to think about something. How many people are willing to allow you to borrow a stock to short when it's plummeting?
Not many.
Not a ton, right?
Yeah.
So when that stock's coming, anytime a stock's parabolic, whether it's going up, if it's going straight up, there's going to be a lot less people willing to sell. And if it's going straight down, there's going to be a lot less people willing to buy. So you can't really build on parabolic movements. That's why that's money time. That parabolic movement is coming from something else that already happened for the most part, unless it's a news catalyst. If you have the news catalyst and then people come in and just start buying, then it's going to eat up all the orders and it's going to start moving. But just a regular trading stock. So like perfect case scenario is when one day we're going to have a real pre-market again. And you would have been able to see that somebody was coming in and selling. I mean, you couldn't see anything this pre-market. I was watching it the whole time. But typically you would get those prints in the pre-market that are setting up for that movement to actually start to happen. But this goes into the same category that we talked about with those cheaper stocks. If I see a stock running down like this, what I'm looking for is any spot, any of these levels that get some bid prints come into them. And because the volume's high first thing in the morning, I'm looking for a quick pull up and then the next trigger down, I'm going to take it. So it's not like shooting from the hip. It's still a calculated trade. It's just being based off something that's happening very quickly.
Got it. Okay, that makes complete sense. I completely understand.
Because if the stock's just tanking down in the beginning of the morning and you hit short, that's a great way to just blow your account up.
Yeah, seriously.
Typically LCID or any stock, we're not going to see something that pretty just continuously go down like that. That's not what happens on average.
Mm-hmm.
Of course it happens, but that's not something so we can't, if something doesn't happen day in and day out, our whole goal is consistency. We can't trade anything that doesn't happen consistently. Typically a stock like LCID it would come down, would get those big prints, then it would pull back up a lot more, then it would come back down. You're not typically going to get just the beautifully smooth trending type stocks. And when those happen, we have to go to the same theory that we were talking about before, and that what Trevor was talking about before, is that we need things all at once then. Because if it's going to move all at once, when it pulls back up, I'm going to be looking for that all at once type move.
Okay, so if it starts to trigger up and you kind of get that substance that tells you it could easily go much higher, and it kind of supports your theory of covering the whole price target all at once, are you really worried about like if it pulls back 30 to 50 cents at that point? Or when do you kind of like, what happened?
That's all going to depend on my entry.
Okay.
If I have a good entry, then no. But if sometimes I might get a late entry, depending. Or like the trigger doesn't happen until it's already there. So if I only have like 20 cents, let's say it's at 29.80 is where my entry goes in, and I only have 20 cents to that 30 level, I'm going to treat things a lot differently. Because now that 30 level, that 20, they could break me down 20 cents in 2 seconds. Now, if I got in under, let's say 29.50, I got a perfect entry. Now it's coming up to 30. I'm going to give it a lot more leeway.
Mm-hmm.
It's my management of my trade is going to be based off of how good of an entry I actually get, because that's where my game plan sits.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say I did short LCID just from the beginning. Let's say I just clicked short. The way I look at it is, how much am I willing to give up when the chances are there's going to be another entry? So obviously, if I short it right here, it's just going to keep going and going and going. I really have no time to actually get out. But as it's going, now I'm going to start setting spots where if it breaks up higher than that spot, I'm going to take my profit, because statistically, if a stock's moving like that, I will get another entry coming into it. And realized profit is the only way we make money. Unrealized profit means nothing to us.
Got to pay yourself, right?
Exactly. Well, so I'm not going to let a stock, if stock go up 50 cents against me, if I know that it needs to pull up 50 cents and then I should have another entry. Then I'm going to get out. Why would I give up that 50 cents?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if a stock tells me that it's not a stock that really gives a lot of entries, I might give it more leeway, because I know I might not be able to get into it high, with a high percentage at another point. So I'm willing to give up an extra 10, 20 cents to be able to stay in the trade versus getting out of it and not being able to get back into it.
Mm-hmm. And what's the psychology behind if they start to pull an order? Because I noticed just now when we were coming back up through 30, we did have like 12, 13,000 shares, but I think maybe like half of that executed. Is there any significance to that? Or is there psychology behind that? Or is that kind of not big enough of an order?
That's not big enough.
Okay.
12,000 shares is, I mean, that could be, especially like a stock like LCID, the amount of volume that it trades. That's if it was, 100,000 share order, that would change. But 12,000, when the orders are pretty decently, filled, and
Mhm.
you see, you'll see all the time 2,000 come out here, 5,000. There's not really enough behind that, because let's break it down to the simplest form. Someone that's only trading 12,000 shares, is that the person that I want to follow their research?
Yeah, it's not the person at 30, that's for sure.
Yeah, not even close, right? So it's just,
Yeah.
it's not, it's okay, great, but it's nothing that really, I mean, I don't even pay attention to it because it's just not enough.
So when we're
You have
coming,
to have a certain level of respect for the person that you're following. If there's not that level of respect, then it's like, well, why am I listening to this person then?
right, yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I feel like that's so important to like trust your trade, especially when you're trying to like not cut it before you get to the price target, you know?
Hmm.
So when we're on the tape right now, like you kind of you're getting like these single asks coming in, but the money flow really kind of like changed a little bit. The personality of the money flow to like more like printing ask, but it's just doing it in like these like singles and double prints. And sometimes like I kind of get caught between, is that enough for a trade, or is that not enough for a trade, or to stay in a trade rather? So
So
how would you
it's
interpret that?
So if the money flow is changing to buying, that's just going to exactly what our expectations of this trade were going to be. We're going to get
Mhm.
that big pull up that's going to happen in a big trend. That's going to happen technically. When I say all at once, I don't mean there's going to be a 1 minute bar that goes $5. I mean that it's going to get that nice trend and it's going to continue
Yeah,
back up. So when that
makes
money flow is changing to buying, it's confirming everything that we've went over so far. So
okay.
that's a great thing.
hmm So would
Especially
you?
because now we're coming to that print line. So now we got to pay attention. Do we get the prints that are going to weaken that print line for us to be able to get through?
Yeah, and I think something you said in a previous class this week was you have to know where to anticipate getting new information, and I feel like that's really helped me a ton. Because then you're not really caught blindsided when, let's say, you get a bunch of selling at the print line now. You kind of know what it has to do at that point.
A hundred
Or what
percent.
you
See,
can
well, that's
expect.
where the anticipation comes from because I'm paying attention at this print line now. If I get a ton of off-level selling that's coming into it, well, that's not helping get through that print line. So
Mhm.
just like I follow people into trades, I'm going to follow people out. So if I see coming up to that print line, I get a bunch of selling that's coming in that essentially is strengthening that print line as a resistance point.
Why
I'm
wouldn't
going
you
to
do
have
the
to
same,
take
right?
off a part of my position.
Okay, that makes complete sense. And then, as we kind of like, we're gonna expect lower volume coming into like 11 o'clock, right? Are
Hmm.
you are you changing your volume requirement for a trigger at all based on the new volume patterns that are forming?
So what's the volume personality of this stock?
I would say it does have dips and valleys. It is consistent, but it does have dips and valleys. Like it does
Yeah,
show,
consistent trading with dips and valleys, right?
yeah.
So my volume criteria is going to constantly be changing based off of the dips and values they create. Because again,
Okay.
everything's relative. You could have a stock that trades smoothly and phenomenally that trades 100,000 shares. You could also have one that trades, 10 million shares. So
Mhm.
it's relative to what that stock is showing. In this case, every time that we create a new dip or a new valley, for instance, we're coming in and when the volume starts to wane and come back down, I'm going to be now at about 300,000. When
Okay.
before, when you asked me, it was 500,000 to 550,000. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
So
that
it's going
makes
to be
total sense.
relative on as long as the stock has to still be trading. Because if the stock's just not doing anything, then
Mhm.
relative from 15,000 to 15,000, that's not going to work for us. Obviously, we need that consistent trading. That's one of the most important factors there. Okay, but as we're coming in, as the stock, like I said, everything just becomes relative. If it keeps trading, but the volume starts to lower down, I can't expect to have the same volume that I had at 9:30 or at 10 o'clock. I have to
Right.
base it off of what we see that's happening right now.
And when the volume gets lower like that, I feel like there's an increased like chance of kind of just rotating shares with mixed prints and a consolidation at that point. Um, at that point, do you really like you have to see that off level buying really burst back in, right? To take a trigger. Like if it starts to pull back and
In this
consolidate.
in this case, remember they're not going to, the level of, excuse me, a number three trade is definitely a little bit more advanced. So in this case,
Mhm.
for this number three, yes, because we're starting to see that volume slow down. So if that volume's slowing down, remember we talked about this in personalities, just because the volume's slowing down doesn't mean the actual buying, and because I need it to continue to where it's going. Otherwise, if it just goes into a consolidation, goes to the side, it becomes a distraction. I'm going to miss other things while I'm paying attention to this. So as long as I still see that trading going in, I'm on my same game plan. I'm still following the same person at 30 that showed us that gigantic bid prints that showed us they needed to build gigantically. And now I just want to keep seeing a little buying here, a little buying there to confirm where we're looking to go.
Okay, cool.
All right, Vinny, great job. I know this was your first time. Absolutely phenomenal questions.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
I'm glad. All right, guys, do we have any questions before we finish up? All right, beautiful. So class will be again at 3 p.m. So I will talk to everyone in the chat, and happy trader. Great job, Vinny and Trevor.